Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our third session for Digital Learning Day. So far, we've gone over frameworks, creating your own digital literacy skills and not skills, but plans. We went over AI and applied to careers. And this session, we're going to be going into blended learning strategies and models to meet learner needs. Our presenter today is Jen Vanek. Jen Vanek is Director of Digital Learning and Resource at World Education and is a researcher for and professional learning facilitator focused on digital literacy, online learning, and adult education. She directs communities of practice that help adult education researchers, practitioners, and excuse me, and administrators develop quality educational opportunities for adult learners, including the IDEAL Consortium. She's a co-principal investigator on two U.S. Department of Education Institute for Education Science and Research initiatives, exploring technology use in adult basic education. Thank you very much for presenting for us today. Vanek, and should begin. Thank you again.
Hi. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Jose, and thanks, Amy and Jose, for inviting me to share some work with you today. I'm going to be introducing you all, or perhaps just reminding you about some instructional models that leverage blended learning. You probably already know about these. You might actually be doing these things, but just don't call them the names that I call them. At any rate, this work comes from a project. Oh, sorry. So I'm gonna give you an overview of a guide where a lot of this work is defined, and where you can start to get information about how to think through choices that you might make around different blended learning models. We're going to give you a chance to reflect on your needs and questions, why you might turn to blended learning as an instructional strategy. We'll spend a little bit of time thinking about what we actually mean when we say blended learning. Those are these models. And then I'm just going to make sure you understand where in the guide that'll be showing you in a minute, you can actually get more information or to answer questions that you have. So this is the guide that I'll be referring to. This was funded by New Readers Press. David Rosen and I think we started this in 2018, 2019. We started working with Ideal consortium member states. Connecticut is one of the 22 states as part of Ideal Consortium. I'll just say for really quickly, Ideal Consortium is a community of practice for state level leaders who want to use technology to really personalize, expand, and boost the quality of the instruction that they're providing their adult learners. And so we started with ideal member learners to see what their needs were around understanding implementation of blended learning. And then we took that and had a broader scale landscape scan qualitative approach to defining examples and defining practices and defining examples. And we came up with the guide. So the guide starts by touching on what blended learning is. Walks the reader through a process where you're thinking about, like, well, am I using blended learning to think about who I'm serving, or am I thinking about blended learning to help me determine what content I deliver them? There's a little bit of a justification around why blended learning, some very practical tips for how you might get started at the program or classroom level. And then we walk through some models with some very concrete examples, share some resources that you could use, digital tools, digital content that you could use to integrate into your blended learning, and then talk through some of the common challenges that emerged through our interviews and our landscape scan of blended learning practices in adult ed across the U.S. So this guide is the foundation of everything we're going to be talking about in the next 55 minutes or whatever it is. But before we get started, I want to share the working definition of blended learning that I'm going to be thinking about every time I say blended learning. This comes from the research of the Christian the Christensen Institute. Clayton Christensen in the like mid 2000s had this series of books called Disrupting Class, Disruptive Innovation. It's actually like comes from the Harvard Business School and talking about how technology can be layered into an existing system to really shift the way work happens and in the process solve some of the problems that are traditionally faced in that system. So, blended learning is an example of one of these disruptive innovations that the Christian Institute takes on. So, what we understand it to be is a teaching approach that has a face-to-face class or tutorial integrated with online learning, and students have some control over time, place, path, or pace. In some subsequent research done by Robert Murphy at SRI, um, he and his team went into like 100 classrooms across the US to see how technology was being used. This is like in the late 2000, like around 2015, they were doing this research. And one of the models they looked for was blended learning. And they wanted to enrich or make sure that this definition of blended learning actually reflects what's happening in adult ed classrooms. And so we tag on this research from the from the Murphy sorry this component from the Murphy research that in blended learning the face-to-face and the online components are integrated and they reinforce each other, whereas hybrid is I'm using as more of a general term where we just are generally referring to this idea that well, people come to class, they might sit and engage in activities together with their peers and their teacher in the classroom. And then, hey, maybe we'll just assign them like USA Learns or something from Essential Ed or Burlington or whatever that they're just going to do on their own. That would be more like hybrid. So this is what I am thinking about when I use this term blended learning. So understanding that as our starting point, I wonder if you would be willing to do a mentee poll just so I can get a pulse check on your interests here. So there's the Q. There are many ways into Menti, as you know. I think Jose is going to chat a link. You could also just go to menti.com on your phone and enter that code. And what I'd like to know is what program or instructional challenge draws you to consider using blended learning as an approach? So if you could go to Get to Menti and respond to that question, that would be amazing. I also have this on a QR code. If you would like to just shoot this QR code, you could do that. So I'll just give you a second to think through that. And this is a Menti word cloud, so we're talking about like a word or two for you to answer this question. And thanks for those links, Jose. Okay, I think while you're doing that, I am going to pop over to that Menti and we can see what's coming in. Okay, so I'm seeing diverse learning, classroom space, transportation. Looks like it has more than one hit. Looks like we've got 13 responses. We'll give it a minute for a few more. I love flexibility. I love seeing engagement. Good for family literacy programs. Transportation. Okay, engagement is popping up more too. And transportation keeps getting bigger. Access. I would love to know more about that. Would someone who wrote transportation unmute and just say a little bit about that? I'm thinking Connecticut is a place that's not super rural and people might have be in close proximity to classes. Anybody want to say anything about their contribution here?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, so I was not one of the persons I put in transportation, but I do teach. And one of the reality checks is that at least the folks that I deal with, are sort of on the fringes of the socioeconomic world. So even though we may be a small state, not so rural, they have actual real world problems of they don't have a car.
Okay.
Whether the bus line runs at the time and near the location. So that I see as the transportation challenge,
Okay.
not the geographic disbursement in Connecticut.
Okay, thanks. That's really helpful. Okay, well, I sent Jose a PDF of my slides, and I'm going to send him another version with a screenshot of your actual responses. Know that you'll be able to see what everybody said in just a little bit. So the next thing I want to think about, okay, so you all thought about a challenge that you think blended learning might support. Can you think about then how, like, we in our research we found that these were commonly held beliefs about why blended learning is important to integrate. So in our interviews with program leaders, state level leaders, ideal state leaders, this is sort of the synthesis of the top priorities and why they felt blended learning was important. So it's more effective than face-to-face learning. If you go into the guide, you can actually see some research behind that. It extends learning time on task so students can progress more quickly. It supports review of content for reinforcement. It supports flexible programming that helps learners persist if there's work like their daily routines or family demands change. It makes homework more convenient and appealing, and it creates opportunities for learners to build digital skills because all of this involves some layer of technology. And it also helps provide more touch points for monitoring learner progress. So take a minute, think about your challenge, think about these known reasons or these prioritized reasons for using a blended approach. And if you were going to pick like the most important of these for you, what would it be? And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to rank these. How are these different reasons for using blended learning important to you, and what priority? What's the most important, all the way down to the least or the seventh? So I am going again to the Menti, and we'll see how your prioritization is unfolding. So we'll give you a few minutes to consider these because it takes a little bit of thought, I think. So I'm just going to go on mute for a minute. And this is a slider, by the way. Is anybody in the chat, is anybody experiencing trouble with the slider?
Not so far.
Okay, just gonna refresh to see if things are jumping around. Okay, here we go. All right, so far creates opportunities for learners to build digital literacy. How interesting. Okay. Sports flexible learning is second, extends learning and homework. Okay, we're supports review of course content. Okay. All right. Very interesting. I'll give it another minute. Anybody use Menti in their classes? This is a tool that could be fun and an activity that could be fun for students. Flexibility. Okay, so flexibility and digital literacy seem to be really important goals. Okay, so again, I'll screenshot this and send Jose a new version of the slides that has your responses. Alrighty, so the important thing to know when we think about like meeting, you've got a challenge, you've got prioritized reasons for wanting to try out blended learning. The important thing to know is that when we say blended learning, it's not just one thing. That there are actually models that are described in the handbook, and you can find links to through the Why Blended Learning, it'll lead you to a kind of a project website where we have lots more information. But Some of the earliest work done in blended learning, actually in the K-12 context, was, you can't just decide to use a model and it'll fly, it'll work really well. You actually need to understand why you want to use a new technology, a new instructional routine, a new instructional practice, and then the why is going to shape how you do it. So you want to align your program and instructional challenges and the benefits of blended learning according to your priorities. So, are you in your challenge trying to address what you're teaching, like the content, or are you trying to address who you can teach? And let me give you a few examples of each of these. So, when we say what is taught, what I mean by that is, are you trying to think about content? Um, by using blended learning, is there a way for you to extend learning opportunities? Like you can integrate more and varied content into your instruction. You can support more learner-centered and collaborative learning activities through blended. You could create opportunities for more hands-on projects. You could extend learning beyond the classroom. But through adding blended learnings. So, just adding opportunities for online learning can help expand the amount of content you're covering and the type of content you're covering and the way learners engage with digital content. Um, Often, this type of learning puts teachers more in a facilitator role, and it's the content that you're facilitating that is really critical in supporting learning. So when we talk about this, when we actually, and I'm going to pop back one slide here, um, and talk just a tiny, sorry, I accidentally turned on annotate. I hate when I do that. I'm just going to get rid of that. Okay, so I'm going to go back one slide and talk a little bit about why blended if you're thinking about blended to address who is taught. So for who is taught, at times we need to imagine the instructional strategies that and the formats that we use because we have to reach new learners or we need to serve learners whose situations have changed since they came into the programs. So let's say you've got a learner who needs to stop coming to a class that's meeting at the same time because their work changed or their family situation changed. Maybe, like you said, there was a learner who's doesn't have a car anymore. Maybe they had a car, they just don't have a car, and you want to still be able to serve them. Um, Another way to think about this is maybe you have learners who you can't serve because your classrooms are full. And so you need to figure out new ways to support learners. So these are examples of what is taught and who is taught. Okay, so now let me get into a little bit more for each of these. So when we think about some models of blended learning, which I will show you, I'll define in a second. When we think about what is taught, these models come to mind. So the flipped model where it makes it possible to extend content and enrich class time. A station rotation model supports personalizing or differentiating content. And what Clayton Christensen defines as the a la carte model provides options for more content or coursework. So I'm going to break down each of these and give you an example from our own research for each of these models. So the flipped model is probably the first model people actually heard about when they heard about blended learning. I think this is the first thing I became aware of, and it was quite some time ago. Um, the flip model is really good for a few things, one of which is speeding the delivery of content. So in a flipped model, what would happen is students are assigned content that they work on at home before they come to class. And then when they actually come into the classroom, they're doing more collaborative, hands-on, project enriching kind of work. Think of an English language classroom where you might have vocabulary lists or grammar activities, like really instrumental but very important stuff. Maybe there's a video that you want students to watch to explain something, and you could have that happening online before they come to class so that then when they come in, they can actually apply that learning. So I've got a couple examples. Um, we actually, the Ed Tech Center, we were field testing a learning tool created called Care Academy, which is an online platform for supporting health career sector. Sorry, it's a health career sector's pathway. So we were working with some home health aides who were like not certified, working sort of casually, but they were working toward getting their home health aide certification. And so Care Academy created a course for this that we field tested. It was an online course. In the pilot, we used a flipped model where the learners were doing all of the videos and pre-reading online at home and then coming into class to do the hands-on demonstration work because, you know, many IT programs, there is actual a hands-on demonstration, actual physical component of the career training that has to happen. So the English language learning stuff, a lot of it happened online, and then they came in and they were able to do hands-on, get a little bit more language support where they needed. Because we did this, they were able to go through the content much more quickly than they would have if they had needed to cover all of this in class meetings over time. So that's an example of speeding the delivery of content. Another example of flipped classroom can be seen in the very well-known, maybe you could look this up. Washington State has a program called Integrating Digital English Acceleration. It's I-DEA. And it's an ESL curriculum essentially where the learners are taught English in tandem with their college and career course. So students are able to complete online modules where they learn and practice knowledge of concepts that's like via like an online tutorial or some online activities. And then they come into the classroom for some in-person learning time to apply and practice what they've learned. So flipped model is a great approach. So now I'm going to move into the next one, and then I'm going to talk about the next two, and then we'll pause and then have questions and any observations. The station rotation model, I think, is really excellent for differentiating content. So in this model, a lot of the instruction is actually happening in class, and the differentiation occurs as learners go from station to station. So, for example, we would have a group of students working with a teacher on a concept that's like direct instruction, small group. And then we would have other students who might be working on more differentiated, personalized learning maybe on that concept, or maybe reviewing something that they did the day before, or maybe working ahead because they don't need this teacher-led instruction because they've already got that instruction, working alone on their computers. And then there's maybe another station where they're doing some collaborative activities. So these students might be like, oh yeah, I don't need the teacher-led instruction. I don't need the computer-based skills instruction. I've got this concept down. It's time for me to go work and collaborate and apply these ideas. I saw an example of this in Northern Virginia at the Northern Shenandoah Valley Adult Education Center. They used a station rotation model in their workplace ESL classes held at an assembly plant in their workplace ESL. So the there were like think of a topic like workplace safety, where some of the learners needed to actually learn how to read workplace safety signs. And so they worked directly with a teacher to do that. And then maybe another group of learners was working over on the computer on like pronunciation around how to communicate about workplace safety. And then another group of students maybe doing some sort of campaign to amplify the importance of workplace safety in their site. So these are some of the ways that these teachers and students used the station rotation model in Virginia. Um, so I'm going to go on now actually, I'll pause. Let me pause. I'm going to stop my big screen share and see if any of you I'm going to stop my share. Have any of you used either of these models, the station rotation or the flipped model? And I'd love to hear a little bit about it or hear if you have any questions.
Well, in New Milford, we use the learning stations. My teachers use it in a variety of settings, and my students love it because it gets them up and moving. When they've been working all day to have to sit for 4 hours in classes in the evening, it's a struggle. And so the more we can get our students up and moving, but still learning, the better it is for them.
Wonderful. And I should mention that one of those rotations in the station rotation could be that independent computer work that might not happen in the classroom. That could be something like if you're pairing, like if you have a comprehensive curriculum like Burlington English that has both in-person and online components that are like that curriculum is tightly woven together. Maybe you're assigning that online stuff happening at home. So some of that can happen at a distance. Great. Thank you for sharing that. So let me go on to the next examples. We're going to think about blended learning models that address who is taught. And two that come to mind to me are learning circles, which is actually not something from the Christensen research, but stuff that we saw as happening. And then this a la carte model, which does come from the blended learning universe, the Clayton Christensen work. So the a la carte model is really critical for considering flexibility for very busy adults. So it combines online independent learning supported by some in-person instruction, which could be in-person, like synchronous online, like, a web conference, or it could be coming into a classroom, coming into a learning lab. Essentially, you look at your program and you see what's feasible for you to offer. How can you package it or provide modularized activity opportunities for learners to engage where they can and when they can? Um, these tend to be mostly online and provide the most flexibility for learners who can't come into the classroom. Um, so I think an example I could share with you is something that I saw at a workplace ESL class at the Minneapolis International Airport. Um, the class only meets twice a week, 2 hours, sorry, once a week. Once a week, 2 hours, 2 hours a week. Not enough time they were frontline service workers. Most of them were from East Africa, and the airport was really invested in them boosting their English skills so that they could interact with people going through the airport. So in the class, the teacher had to maximize the very limited amount of instructional time that was available to them. So she focused on the components of English grammar. That's what she felt the learners needed in class. She focused on pronunciation. She focused on vocabulary. But then online, the learners were kind of they were at different places with this. So in order to meet the needs of this diverse classroom of learners, each of these learners was paired with a different online curriculum. Some of them really worked on like basic literacy through actually use the app Learning Upgrade. Um, which is cool because it builds literacy through use of songs, and they've got like this range of songs available for students to use to learn. Higher level learners chose to use an app called Read Theory. Whoops, sorry, did not mean to do that. Um, where they were able to get some direct guidance with their reading and basically build literacy as they were going. And the cool thing about Read Theory is that they were able to not only like work at their own pace and their own level, but then they could actually choose kind of the content that they wanted to read. So it was personalized in that way too. So a really cool element of this program was if the learners participated in use, like they came to class and then after they had logged 75 hours of learning through either of these applications or something else that the teacher assigned, they were given a free refurbished laptop, which was super cool. The employer in this case actually made that possible and worked with the adult ed program to supply those refurbished laptops. And that kind of motivation was that kind of incentive was really motivating. I would hear learners talking about how far they were toward getting their laptop. So it's really cool. The other kind of like who we're dealing with model is a learning circle, which is something that maybe you've all heard of. David Rosen has done quite a bit of work in this area. We've done a bunch of stuff too, field testing this instructional model. And we actually have a playbook out there somewhere. I can get that link to you later. But this is really good for personalizing instruction for learners or offering content to learners who might be on wait lists. I'm not sure what your situation is in Connecticut right now. These things tend to ebb and flow where they're periodically state capacity to provide programming to everybody who shows up is just it's just not possible. So learning circles are a situation where learners might come into a lab-like setting. They might have their own device. They might sit at desktops in a lab. They might have access to laptops or tablets. And there's kind of a tutor or instructor in the middle of the room. And learners will work independently according to their need, checking in with each other, which is a key component of the learning circles. So maybe like learners who are all kind of at the same level or working on the same online content, but at maybe in different places or at different paces might sit together. And the learners help each other. They work independently. The teacher's kind of bopping around and helping. So this to me sounds a lot like the digital learning labs that exist in many adult ed programs around the country. Also happens in libraries. I'm not sure if that's the case in Connecticut, but a good example of this is the Queens Adult Library Learning Program, um, which uses this approach with tools like they use Learning Upgrade, they use something called Voxy, which is now Engine. They use Burlington English, and they use Essential Ed for this. And they are actually very intentional about encouraging the same small groups of learners to come in to work together because that kind of feeling of cohort and personal, like peer-to-peer support they have found to be a really important component of the learners actually wanting to come in to participate in these learning circles. So I am going to pause again at this point to see to hear about how you might be leveraging this sort of a la carte model, or if, hear what this reminds you of, if you might not be calling it this, but if you're doing something similar, or if you're doing some version of learning circles. Oh, and one more thing about learning circles. In some situations, this is actually not a licensed instructor, but I have seen this work, especially in library settings, with a volunteer who has some knowledge of adult learning or the content that the students are working on. So I'll stop the share again. Would love to hear about the presence of these models in the programs where you all are working. So maybe something new. Are there wait lists in Connecticut? Or are you able to meet the demand that is showing up?
There's a comment that says, I've done the a la carte method because I have learners at different levels and speeds. It allows for independent practice.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah. The a la carte method kind of like now, since David and I did this work, high flex has become like the new biggest, baddest thing. And a la carte reminds me of what high flex is, but high flex is more cohort based, where a la carte is absolutely a differentiation. Others?
Another comment came in, the a la carte menu works well with diverse learners and their level of knowledge of digital literacy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, right, because you can use different digital tools according to what learners can handle for sure. And we've got learning circles. One program's using learning circles for online courses and lab hours for other courses. Okay. And Norwich had a wait list. Okay. So maybe you're okay, you're not in need of that now, but do keep in mind learning circles, I think. Um, for if you do have wait lists. The other thing I want to point out is a lot of these examples that I'm giving include the name of like a licensed proprietary curriculum. I am like not in necessarily endorsing one of the other. I also want to recognize that there's a lot of excellent teacher created content that you might be using. So I'm not saying you have to have a license to one of these products to actually implement one of these scenarios. It's just sort of shorthand for me. Okay, so Janet says Danbury has wait lists. I wonder, if you've considered learning circles as a way to address this. And if so, we are happy to send some resources your way to help you figure that out. Anyone else want to jump in, unmute, say anything here? Okay, so I have a few other things to share with you. Um, Actually, I think I'm going to go to the actual handbook at this point. So, um, there are, let me hop over here. Okay. So, one of the things that we include in this handbook and is the list of media. Sorry for the making you dizzy. Oh, I should also say, when we introduce these programs in here, a lot of the examples that I gave are written up as fuller vignettes in this guide. So I encourage you to take a look at it. And then the thing that I'm scrolling here right here is the sort of if we had to map out steps for getting started with any of these models, those are the steps that we think are helpful for you. Um, okay, this is where we get into more description of each of these models, and then also there are actually other examples too, that I didn't get to, just given time, but so you can read into more of these examples for sure. Okay, so the next thing, just more case studies. Yeah, we really think case studies are important, so I'm going to scroll past those. Um, what you will also see in here, eventually, if I can get to it, are some recommendations for online learning resources that work well to support blended learning. Yeah, and Pamela, you will have a direct link to the guide. It's on the last slide. I just want to share the caveat. So this list is continuously growing as technologies improve, as more new things become available, especially now with generative AI and all of the possibility that new generative AI tools introduce. So, if you're starting off small, one of the recommendations that we have is if you do have access to some sort of online curriculum. Um, Offloading some of the instruction to that curriculum can free your time and just mental capacity to consider how to best provide your instruction across multiple tools. Like if you're doing it through direct instruction as a teacher, or you've got access to like a great bank of open education resources. If you can fall back on one approved primary curricula, it can take some of the weight out of your choices. And that's important. Um, we suggest that anything that you do be mobile friendly, like make sure that the apps that you choose, learners can work on the phone. And this part of the guide talks a little bit about some options. It's also really important to track progress when you're using this online curriculum. So make sure that whatever tool you have provides an affordance for that, or that you consider maybe putting all of this stuff through a content management system or a learning management system so that you can actually track progress. Another thing is that you don't have to recreate everything. And I'm actually gonna pop over here to open up a link. One of the things that is really important to us at the Ed Tech Center is to support teachers in locating and evaluating quality online free and open resources. So we have, if you click on that link through the guide, you can get to some evaluated resources that we have already um, compiled. Um, you can access stuff through these linked Google Sheets. Another way in is, and this is a whole other thing, this application Skill Blocks is a free app that is stocked with standards aligned or competency aligned open education resources. So you could create an account, you could search by skill or keyword, or even an academic standards list. Like we have just integrated CCRS for adult ed reading at a couple different levels. And you can find OER that you can pull into a structured learning like sequence of activities that you share with your learners. So I guess the point is there is a multitude of free content out there that we hope that you'll integrate into your instruction. Um, so I'm wondering, actually, I'm going to stop the share, and I would love to hear from people what online tools you're using and where you might be going for free content, free digital content that you're integrating into your classes. Jose, do you all have, does Connecticut provide guidance on choosing any of these online tools?
You mean like for under skill blocks, you mean?
No, no, no. Just like generally speaking, like do you encourage people to use certain comprehensive curricula or programs choosing on their own? Like what's the landscape there?
So agencies, well, what we do through ATDN and digital ATDN is that we have consultants that will help out curate and offer guidance, strategies, and resources. We do a lot of we do trainings and we release through newsletters and things like that. In our end in digital ATDN, we provide a lot of like the tech support piece in just exploration of the curricula and digital resources and
That's great.
bridges, that kind of thing.
So you have access to people in your state who are kind of experts on certain things. And I'm seeing hi Connie. I'm seeing you remind everybody about Desmos, which is an excellent tool for teaching math. I love that. And a lot of people are going to GCF Global. Um, that's great. Do the Google Apps Ski course. What about for core content around English language arts or ESL? What digital content are people using in Connecticut? Okay, we've got Burlington English, Ellie, another excellent example. Yeah, these are all great. So it sounds like there is a range of content and you've got Jose and his organization and helping kind of help people understand where they can get support using these things. Okay, you've got Aztec there too. That's great. Okay. So the next section of the guide kind of walks through some common challenges implementing this model for instruction. And so I'm just going to walk through some of these and then we're going to talk a little bit about how you may or may not be experiencing these challenges in your program. So the big one, obviously, learners lack access to Wi-Fi outside of the programs. So choosing a tool that maybe is like maybe they could bring their phones into school, download something, and then when they go home, they don't have to rely on Wi-Fi when they're out of the school. Maybe you could help connect them to some public internet areas. Everyone on is actually not functioning anymore. That remember this was published in like 2020. So, but there are other ways to find low cost internet. Probably Jose has some ideas about that with that are like based in Connecticut. We have also seen a surge of since the pandemic of loaning out devices, both refurbished laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots. Um, so any of these access things, if you are looking for more information, we definitely have resources that we can share with your program or with Jose, and we can get or your state leadership, and we can get more resources into your hands to help some of these access challenges. Another challenge is that teachers are often new to using technology in the classroom. Again, this was published before the pandemic, and so I think a lot more teachers have a stronger facility and more confidence in doing these integrations. Um, but what's important to know is I think knowing what you want to teach, so starting with some standards, starting with what you know about learner access and learner interest and digital skills, and then choosing your online content or your digital content to meet the needs as defined by those standards, the resources learners have, and their digital literacy. So you can't just say, "Oh God, I just came across this really cool, like shiny new digital object, and I want to integrate that into my instruction." Everything needs to go through this filter is, okay, can it be used to address the standards I know I need to cover? Do learners like, can they actually make use of this depending on like the resources we can provide them, with computers or, access? Do they have the digital skills? And what needs to be integrated in order to support their use before I can use this shiny new object? Um, I'm not going to talk about the draw initiative at all, but you should know that one of the things that we've been doing to build on this work is working with Octave through the Digital Resilience for the American Workforce Project. And if you just Google links, LANCS, draw, you'll come up with a ton of resources to help address both the access challenge and this challenge of helping teachers integrate technology. The whole point of Draw is to help teachers know better how they can help teachers better integrate technology into their instruction in a manner that helps students build digital literacy. So you're doing these things simultaneously. That is a whole different presentation, which I'm sure we can arrange, or you could just go to the draw site on links for more information there. Um, Another problem is finding examples of curricula for the different levels of teachers that you or learners that you might face. It sounds like a lot of you have access to a range of curricula, so that might not be such a problem. But going to CrowdEd and finding some open access resources and Skill Blocks actually has tagged resources according to NRS level in many cases or competency levels. So there are many more OER out there than there were when we wrote this. Um, Funding to purchase proprietary curricula is probably a problem. I'm not sure if Connecticut is part of or if any of your programs are part of the pro literacy network. If you are, they can get you discounts on any of the curricula that they host through New Readers Press, so that might be a solution there. So, other challenges that came to mind. Oh, you are members of Pro Literacy, Pamela. That's great. So you have access to discounts on anything that New Readers Press provides. So you might want to check that out. Um, Others, what are you doing what challenges have you experienced or come to mind? Okay. So maybe wait in, see ability to use we have a code, Kevin, ability to use certain resources in my setting. And I'm wondering, Kevin, whose ability, what the barrier is there to using the resource? Is it like administrative? Is it technical? Is it cost? Oh, security access. Yeah. Are you in a correction setting? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so often these correction settings, you have to have pre-approved links. So something like a proprietary curriculum is probably easier to use than just going into skill blocks and finding a bunch of open ed resources that are all a million links that would have to get vetted. Sometimes these programs and corrections have preloaded laptop or tablets that they use to deliver curricula. Is that do you have any of those options, Kevin?
I'll just unmute.
Thanks.
So we have access to um, what's it's the same company that does JPay. They provide the tablets, but our own education department has laptops that we deployed during COVID, but they're all that all programming has to be vetted through the state's security division, and there's a lot of limitations with um, creating accounts for students, especially when emails are required.
Hmm.
So this is where we come with basically any software is going to require you to have individual unique, login, and usually that's a email.
Yeah, right. So, it sounds like the preloaded tablet scenario is probably a strategy. And I think, doing blended learning doesn't require 10,000 different digital learning objects. Like if you have, I think the it's what's most important is considering like, okay, I've got access to these digital learning objects, I've got or curricula, and I know I'm going to see my learners X number of hours a week. So how do you maybe extend or personalize their learning with the resources that you have? And you have offline, right? That's great, offline leverage resources too. But how do you take what you have and then structure it in a way to maximize learning or speed learning so that people can get through content more quickly? Um, Another thing I guess I might say is if you go into skill blocks, there are a lot of readings in there, and there are comprehension activities that could all be downloaded. So, one idea is to use some of these digital resources that you could use to plan your instruction and then kind of mirror them in an offline sort of modality. Other challenges or other questions? So I could go back to the slides at this point. Okay, so we're basically at the point we've got about 5, 10 minutes left. Happy to field any other questions you might have about the guide, about the models, about implementation. Um, Also, I will put my email in the chat. And if there's anything that I said that you would like to follow up on, please do email me. So I'm just going to drop it in the chat right now. I just want to say that our organization, if you go find some of the resources that you're used to finding at World Education, many of them are hard to find right now because our organization, the parent organization, has unpublished some of our websites as we work through a process to ensure our content is aligned with new federal communications guidelines. So bear with us for a little while as we sort that out and bring our resources back into a more visible public space. In the meantime, if there is something that you want, I can send things to you or talk to Jose because Jose, as a member of the Ideal Consortium, is part of this community of practice, and we can collectively get things to you that you might need to support any of the work that I just talked about. So I will hang around here if anybody has questions. I would love to chat. But otherwise, I hope that you all have a wonderful conference.
Thank you so much, Jen, for presenting today and sharing all this wonderful information. Um, those that want to ask questions, you can. I know there's some that are stepping out. Our next session is, and I did it again. I opened all the links. I can't find it. Our next session is incorporating digital literacy routines into English language learning instruction. That's with Teresa Slatic. That's at 1:15. So there's a 45-minute break, and then we start at 1:15 for the next session. Okay. Thank you very much. Again, I'll leave it here open so you guys can ask your questions. And if not, have enjoy your lunch, enjoy your break, and we'll see you at 1:15.